and it's only one of dozens of similar inconsistencies. Why did the Gospels contain such mistakes? Were they really first-hand accounts? By the middle of the 19th century, one eminent scholar in particular, the German David Friedrich Strauss, had become convinced that the Gospels were not written by eyewitnesses.
Conservative and even mildly liberal theologians protested strongly. But today nearly every Christian historian and theologian, even in the Roman Catholic Church, would agree that on this point Strauss is right. The Gospels could not have been written by the apostles, Matthew and John, and by the disciples of the apostles, Mark and Luke. The Gospel authors must rather have been second-generation Christians.
To this day, the identity of the Gospel authors remains unknown. But if the Gospels were not written by eyewitnesses, when were they written? One major event provides a significant clue. In 66 AD, the Jews rebelled against Rome and were defeated. In an act of fierce retaliation, the focal point of Judaism, the Jerusalem Temple, was completely destroyed. The treasures of the temple were paraded in triumph through Rome, and this arch built to commemorate the Jews' traumatic defeat. So traumatic that, according to most scholars, indirect allusions to it can be found in the Gospels. If so, they must have been written after the defeat occurred, at least 40 years after the death of Jesus. But how long afterwards? By the middle of the 19th century, the hunt for the earliest Gospel texts was on. This is the only way into St. Catherine's Monastery, in the shadow of Mount Sinai in Egypt. In 1859, an intrepid German Bible scholar named Tischendorf entered the basket, and at the same time a monastic world that had remained isolated for over 1400 years. The prize for Tischendorf and for Bible scholarship was this: the Codex Sinaiticus, an almost complete copy in Greek of the Old and New Testaments made soon after Constantine's Council of Nicaea in the 4th century. It's the oldest such volume and is now owned by the British Museum. As the Gospels were written in Greek, it provides a valuable point of comparison with even earlier Greek fragments of the Gospels found among the dry sands of Egypt. Many of these match precisely with the Codex Sinaiticus, proving that there's been little tampering with the Gospels since they were written. One fragment is of special interest.
You see here a tiny piece of papyrus written on both sides, bearing a few verses of John's Gospel. It's the oldest known fragment of any part of the New Testament and was found in Egypt at the turn of the century, but identified properly only in 1934. This papyrus can be reliably dated at around 125 AD. John's Gospel must therefore have been written some time before.
Because of its style and more complex theology, John's had long been recognized as the latest of the 4 Gospels. The others, therefore, must have been composed even earlier. The dating now generally accepted looks like this. Mark, sometime around the events of the Jewish War. Matthew and Luke, who in part both seem to have copied Mark, some 10 years later, and John, before the end of the 1st century, probably around 90 AD. The dating of the Gospels inevitably provoked another yet more crucial question. How reliable were they as historical documents, as accounts of events which actually happened? When Napoleon went to Egypt in 1798, he took with him a group of scholars to study the buildings and inscriptions of pharaonic times. These discoveries revealed startling similarities between the myths of ancient Egypt and the stories in the Bible. Not only were there myths in which men were transformed into miracle-working gods and divine heroes, there were also stories of virgin births and even resurrection. These discoveries prompted the study of other ancient religions, which revealed that they too shared many mythological themes, themes which also ran through Christianity. The rationalists had only sought to explain Jesus' miracles as natural events. But now, a new wave of scholars became convinced that the miracles had never happened at all. They were simply myths which grew up among the early Christians as a way of expressing their belief in Jesus' divinity. The most prominent of these scholars was again the German David Strauss. And he went further. The Church taught that Jesus fulfilled the Old Testament prophecies. But Strauss contended that the early Christians may have copied from these prophecies to fill in details of Jesus' life. He cited passages from the Old Testament which do have an uncannily familiar ring.
Behold, the virgin shall bring forth. But thou, Bethlehem, out of thee shall come forth unto me, that is to be the ruler of Israel. There shall come forth a star out of Jacob. They shall bring gold and frankincense, and shall proclaim the praises of the Lord. Mine own familiar friend, in whom I trusted, which did eat of my bread, hath lifted his heel against me, and took 30 pieces of silver, and cast them unto the potter. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Because he bore the sin of many, he shall be lifted up, exalted to the heights.
After his work was published, Strauss was dismissed from his university post. Today, his work is regarded as a landmark in New Testament studies. In the reaction against Strauss, a great deal of attention was focused on Mark's Gospel, which came to be recognized as the earliest and also, significantly, as having very few of